Thank you very much, Ipsit, Dr. Vahia, for that introduction, and thanks so much for having me here again this year. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about ethics, and I do appreciate everyone coming early on the second day for this important topic. So as Dr. Vahia said, I'm an IRB chair at Partners. We oversee research at McLean and Mass General and Brigham and Women's and other associated hospitals. I'm also a psychiatrist, an addiction psychiatrist, and so I spend a large part of my day essentially reviewing and thinking about research protocols like the ones that I think you have all seen here in the conference and are hearing about here in the conference. And so I think that Dr. Vahia yesterday, I was going to quote him, said something along the lines of privacy makes or breaks this field. And, I think that this really is, in my view, one of the most important areas that kind of cuts across all of digital psychiatry. We take it very, very seriously with Dr. Vahia, Dr. Baker, and others. I think yesterday you saw a U01 panel. We have ethics grant funding to actually think about these types of issues. So we do take it incredibly seriously, and I appreciate everyone showing up to have this discussion with us. So I'm going to start by kind of just giving a little bit of an intro into how to frame this conversation, and then as Dr. Vahia said, we're going to have a little bit of, I think, more of a discussion today. So the title I have here is "What Makes Clinical Research and Work in Digital Psychiatry Ethical?" And I thought we should just start by kind of defining this question, basically. So the first thing is, what do we mean when we say digital psychiatry? So we mean all kinds of things when we say digital psychiatry. We mean text messaging, email, social media, trying to get information from patients or subjects and trying to gain information about what that means about their medical care. We mean telepsychiatry and trying to improve access to care. We mean wearable devices connected to our phones. We mean lots of different apps. We mean big data. We mean neuromodulation, we mean AI, we mean lots and lots of different things when we say digital psychiatry. So when you ask the question, what makes digital psychiatry ethical, it's a really hard question to answer because there's so many different things that we're talking about, essentially. And so the lesson that I take from that is we really have to kind of go back to basics. And so everything that we're hearing about are new ideas in digital medicine, digital psychiatry, but the ethics part is actually not that new, that essentially we rely on the same basic principles of medical ethics and research ethics that we would for anything else, and we just have to think about how to apply those principles in these new fields, basically. So for the second part of the question, basically what makes clinical research ethical, I always come back to a landmark paper that was written by Emanuel Wendler and Grady back in 2000, and they talk about 7 basic principles of what makes clinical research ethical. So scientific value and validity, equitable subject selection, favorable risk-benefit ratio, independent review, informed consent, and respect for enrolled subjects. And so we could spend a lot of time talking about each one of these. I'm not going to belabor the point, except to say I think we can all agree there's major scientific value here, that there's really important work that everyone is doing. Scientific validity will depend on the study itself and the way it's designed. Equitable subject selection is incredibly important, and we could spend an entire probably day or week just talking about that. I think the thing that I'll say just very quickly, that I think is always very important to think about is all the research that we're doing, and then how is that going to be accessible to the whole world, basically, because so much of what we do is so high tech and so expensive, and the goal, I think, with a lot of digital psychiatry is to increase access, but I think it's really important to think about that. Independent review, we typically refer to IRB review, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And then I think the 2 most important things when we think about digital psychiatry really are informed consent and respect for enrolled subjects. And so informed consent, I ask the question of essentially how do we really get people to consent to the types of things we do in digital psychiatry? We're going to talk more about that today. And then respect for enrolled subjects is basically what we mean when we talk about privacy and confidentiality and data security. So we have an obligation in the context of research or medical care to handle people's information in a certain way, and it's an ethical duty to do so, basically. It's not just, if Facebook mishandles your data, they might be breaking the law because you signed a contract and a terms of use agreement, and they might lose business, but there's no ethical duty necessarily. But for us, when we enter into a fiduciary relationship with our patients or research subjects, we have a moral obligation to handle their data in a certain way. And so I think that's, when I think about privacy and data security, it's not just, I think about it in the context of that patient relationship and what it means to be a physician or a researcher. And so basically, the other main kind of thought that I have when I think about this, and when I was asked to do an ethics panel, I had the thought of, the technology changes so quickly that we're not going to be able to keep up, basically. So, as soon as I figure out the exact ethical guidelines for a particular piece of digital psychiatry, the technology is going to change. And we in medicine we tend to be a little slow, actually, in developing guidelines and how to handle these things. Our patients and our research subjects are going to be using things before we are, actually, and before we run our phase 3 trials, and it's going to be out there. And so the question then becomes, so how do you do ethics on something that's changing so quickly? And my personal view is it's the same as what I said before, which is we have to go back to basics. And so one of the basics that I think about is it's a process, not a right or wrong answer, basically. So this is what we're not going to be doing today, basically. So I know a lot about ethics, but I do not claim to be the ethical expert of every single piece of digital psychiatry that we're seeing, because you can't be. It changes just too quickly. And so this is what we are going to be doing today. I think we're going to be asking a lot of questions, and we're going to have a panel discussion that includes you all to try to think about some of these issues. So as a way of framing this, I think about IRB work, because that's what I do. IRBs are typically committees of 5 people that include scientists, non-scientists, non-affiliated members, and all kinds of different people of different backgrounds. And when we look at research protocols, we're trying to minimize risks. This goes back to the same kind of how do we think of research as being ethical. We try to minimize risk. We try to make sure the risks are reasonable. We make sure that informed consent is sought and documented. We make sure that data and safety monitoring are appropriate. And so again, kind of the same basic idea of the technology changes so quickly, there's so much out there in digital psychiatry, we need to use the basics. And so for today, we have an ethics panel, and that includes you guys. So I'm gonna ask the panel to go ahead and come up and introduce themselves to you. And then we will start having our discussion.